Hey folks, this is Joseph Kim from Gamemakers. I'm really excited to share something special with you today, a panel I was part of during the Product LiveOps Symposium hosted during GDC on the evolution of the product management role in games. It was moderated by Tim Hong, LiveOps practice lead at AWS, and joined by Solomon Lichter from CleverTap. Both of these guys join me today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having
us. The conversation brought together a super sharp group of panelists, including PM leaders from Scopely, SciPlay, EA, and more. If you're a product manager, LiveOps lead, or just trying to understand how product thinking is evolving in this rapidly changing industry, especially with AI entering the picture, this is for you. After the panel, stick around. I'll be back with Tim and Solomon for a candid debrief. We talk about what surprised us, what's changed even since GDC, and what takeaways still matter most today.
Thank you all for joining us today. I have a really awesome panel here, moderated by my friend Tim Hong of AWS for Games, LiveOps practice lead, friend, client, partner, all the good stuff. We have JK from Gamemakers, Lila Games, my buddy Joseph Kim. Give it up for Joseph. We have Lee Horn of Mountaintop, Spectre Divide, formerly Scopely, all-around badass. Please give it up for Lee Horn. We have Oren Debi of SciPlay that had the #1 social casino game, I believe, in 2024. Please give it up for Oren Debi from SciPlay, ladies and gentlemen. And last but certainly not least, we have Dave Duong from Apex Legends, Respawn Entertainment, EA, Senior Director of Product. Please give it up for Dave Duong, please. And you know who I am. I'm going to be the one non-game maker on this panel coming from the LiveOps game tech provider perspective. It's good to have you all. I'm going to turn over to our moderator, Tim Hong.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. So we'll get right into it. So we're going to focus on 3 key themes throughout our panel to kind of help all of you. Hopefully most of you are practitioners or learning about PM and why it's so important. And so when we crafted this together, we thought that a really good way to kind of think about it is to talk about the shifts we're seeing in the industry, followed by if you're building out your product management team, like what do you need to do differently? What is the impact of AI and other tools to that? And then lastly, how are you gonna survive or possibly thrive when it comes to your craft going forward? So just some kind of like fun facts, right? So when we're thinking about like gaming, let's call it 5 or 6 years ago in 2019, at the time, Fortnite was only 2 years old. And the big debate at that time was battle royales, is that like a fad or is that like a real thing, right? Apple Arcade was just released and we were wondering if premium and freemium was coming back. And that was right before we all had the big COVID boom, right? And so we all thought, hey, that's great. Now we fast forward to 2025, there's definitely a hangover from COVID, from all of us, running our games. We're seeing large publishers basically put out games, new IPs, shooters, RPGs, people leaving large publishers, starting their own thing, and maybe it not working out so well. We're seeing a lot of M&A activity, and we're also seeing a change in function of how PMs run. So from an industry perspective, want to start with JK and just kind of get some of your thoughts on AAA development and how you see it, what's the current state of affairs right now?
Sure. So, I mean, I personally can't speak too much in terms of the AAA game development sort of practice just because I'm more from the mobile side and I would say like the quality of the games that we make probably don't go to that extent, but I think I can kind of comment in terms of some of the trends that I'm seeing.
Just trends, yeah.
Right, because I think what we are seeing is there's like this current wave of macro trends that are impacting the industry in fairly significant ways, right? So I think some of these trends you'll be familiar with. For example, one we've seen with the proliferation of like, video on demand as well as live operated games that are becoming increasingly popular, there is an issue with respect to an attention economy, and getting attention, especially if you're launching a new game, is becoming increasingly difficult. I think the second macro trend that we've seen is we've seen the rise of China, and we've got extremely big budget, huge teams that are working 996, and it's very, very difficult to compete against some of these Chinese teams. And I think what we're sort of faced with, the other thing that we've seen is we've also seen a resurgence in live ops with games like Brawl Stars, which has essentially been able to like 6x their revenue last year. And so there's this fundamental issue today with how do you succeed in new game development, because it's very, very challenging. So that's like the first wave of macro, and there's a lot of other things there that we could talk about, but not to bore the audience with all the specific nuance and details around that. So that's the first wave that's hitting, and now, just as we're feeling the effects of the first wave, we're now being hit by the second wave of AI, and I don't need to go into, we can probably go into more details in terms of that, but what we're seeing is an increasingly challenging environment for being successful as a product manager, and there's a lot of ramifications of the macro trends that I've talked about. Happy to go into more detail if you'd like, but those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
I'm smiling because like if there's one audience we can nerd out on, it's probably these guys because they live it every day. So I mean, that's why I think it's kind of funny. But Lee, like let's kind of expand upon that a little bit more, right? Like if you're running a live service game now, and for some of these that have like longer shelf lives, like what are some of the things that game teams and have to think about differently now in 25, right? If you have a game that's been around for quite some time, what are some of the different ways you have to think about it versus like 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, I can give it from the, let's call it indie developer perspective. So I worked on Apex. I had a product pre-launch as well as through first year of live service, and now I was working on a tactical shooter called Spectre Divide. And very similar strategies at different times in the market. So our core strategy on Apex was create a battle royale with characters, slight differentiation. I'm underselling what was changed, but same core game as PUBG, add characters. Spectre Divide is a core tac shooter with two-body gameplay, which we call duality. The change over time, though, that was a 5-year difference, is that in the market, there are many live services now that have been around for 5, even 10 years. And what that's doing is it's creating a really hard competitive environment to compete with. So all of those games have years and years of credibility in terms of, at least for PvP shooters, really high quality matchmaking, great anti-cheat, all these things that when you are now trying to make a new game into that environment, it is much harder to compete with. So sort of my recommendation, having just lived this, is if you are thinking about a competitive PvP game, do not go up with an incumbent that has been around a long time, because you basically need to be the winner of the entire market to have enough matchmaking to make fair games. So what I suggest, out of these learnings is either make games where they're less of like a fighting game or, need to be even matches. So make games where mismatched teams can really have fun and compete well, or have a really good IP with your game, or just try to avoid PvP altogether. I would just, it is very hard. And if you're going to do it, you really need an edge. Like a small innovation is not enough. For Apex, it was a relatively small innovation relative to the market, but no Battle Royale live service had been around for a long time. So we weren't going up against years of, there's a great game here. So yeah, that's what I would watch out for, and just really think about if your game needs to be highly competitive, try to find other ways to succeed if there's an incumbent that's been around.
Yeah, I think we hit on an interesting point around player expectations, like changing. And I remember one of the PMs I worked with at Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, we had a discussion that some player expectations are immutable. Like players go into a game kind of expecting something, even if that's not what it could be. David, I kind of want to throw to you, now that you actively work on Apex, what are your thoughts around changing player expectations? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to tie it back to something JK said earlier. So when he mentioned China, right? I think what has happened now is not that new problems have arisen as much as they have gotten much worse. And so you see like Marvel Rivals, right? Like what the hell are they doing launching 4 new characters in a season? It's insane, right? Like we couldn't keep up with a new legend every single season, and they're launching 4 in one season. It's absolutely crazy. So that is causing a big, massive has raised the expectation of players, right? And so in order to compete, you have to meet players where they are. Games like Fortnite and COD, they just have an onslaught of content. And so for us, we're really struggling with this challenge now of how do we meet players where they need us to be so they're not going to other games. Second thing as well is with the giant influx of free-to-play live service games, again, competition for time, right? Across entertainment and games. And so we haven't figured out the strategy yet, I would say, but we're challenging a lot of our sacred cows. So I think the good news with all of this is where it makes PM, I think, very valuable, right? Because we're able to come in, help do proper assessments on what features are driving value, which ones aren't, what does adoption look like, et cetera, and get really surgical with the limited resources that we have. And so, yeah, going back to the free-to-play and just the switching costs being extremely low, we also are really taking a look at things like in live service back in the day, right? It was about dominating and monopolizing people's time. But do you need to do that? Like, what if you had a game that you retained for a long time, but you're not driving that like 100 hours of play in one day, right? What does that look like? And so we're really challenging ourselves in this way to understand and try to solve the problem of retaining players long term, but not necessarily dominating every single second of their lives so they can go watch Netflix, play other games, and then ultimately come back to Apex.
Yep, we are in a multi-screen world for sure. Oren, I kind of want to talk to you, right? I mean, we can't have a panel without talking about AI, right? So like, this is now a thing, it's not a fad, right? But I guess the question to you is like, it can make production faster, it not necessarily is better, but I guess your thought, like, what is your thought on what is hype versus what is real for game development right now?
Yeah, so thank you. I think, yeah, it does make production faster because the adoption is mainly around efficiency. The way that I see it today, most of the users that uses AI is using it as something that helps them do things faster rather than completely replace the processes that they are doing. So I know that there are a lot of talks about transformative uses of AI, but we are not seeing it yet. So the things that are going on today and we have started to adopt is around the art, creating characters using AI. We saw like 40% increase using AI tools to create the collectibles and all kinds of other features that we're using. Code Assistant is also something that is greatly used. LLMs, specifically for product managers, doing CI, doing PRDs, wireframes, all of the heavy stuff that takes a long time to do. We see it being used by AI. And the things that are just talks right now and not, it's like doing a complete gameplay. Mm-hmm. We are not, I see tries of doing it, but I haven't seen something that can match what a person can do. Yeah, we had Gartner share some framework with us over at AWS. I think it's great is when you think of AI, there's return on effort or like employee productivity. There's return on investment, which is like, making a bottom line process better and faster and automated. And there's return on future, which is like what you're saying, which is like, hey, make a game with one click. And I think it's good to hear that return on effort is a valid use case to, make our jobs better, right? So thanks for sharing that. I kind of want to move now to talking about like building and scaling PM teams. Solomon, you had a bit of a thought here that you wanted to share. And one thing that I think when we were preparing, talking about this was that there still seems to be kind of a difference between how product managers are perceived or even used within console and PC studios versus mobile studios. Solomon, I know you had some thoughts on that. Did you want to share with us?
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm a, 15, 16-year mobile guy, right? So my biases are very, very mobile. I have a tremendous amount of respect for what console folks do. And the things I've heard about the console world, I've heard through osmosis and learned that from friends of mine in the console world. But those folks moved from mobile into console, right? Because I think that, just to kind of throw this out there, despite what the market is, I believe that mobile PMs are very sought after because of their skill set, the way they're able to act on data, just generally the way they work. I think the console makers want that, right? The challenge is, as I understand it, and have spoken to folks who have told me, is working at a large organization in the console space, you're really a part of a freighter. It's a battleship that's driven by a lot of tribal knowledge, a lot of amazing talent, very emotional artists. But the DNA is different than what you have in mobile. You think about the way that console evolved. It really evolved out of movies. So we're talking about big, waterfall-y, massive projects that always have scope creep and take a long time. And if you think about mobile it came out of tech, right? It came out of companies like Facebook. It came out of companies like Zynga. And so it's very, very different DNA related, and there's been some cross-pollination between the two, but very, very different. And I think that mobile PMs expect to be able to act on data really, really fast. It's kind of back to the old Zuckerberg adage, move fast and break things. Even if it's the wrong thing, keep iterating until you figure it out. I think you have to do that with the mobile audience. You have to do that when you're trying to monetize and you're experimenting with things. And so the folks that I know, some folks that I know that have gone over have expressed that, that shock about how hard it is to move quickly and act on that data. It's not like those console folks don't have the data. They got tons of resources. They got big data science teams. I'm sure they're doing a lot of cool stuff. It's just really hard to act on in an environment like that is fundamentally not agile and probably never will be because of what the nature of what console is.
Yeah, I know that a lot of you up here have worked both in mobile and PC console. Did you guys have any other insights you wanted to share on kind of the differences you see culturally wise, or?
Yeah, I've worked on Monopoly Go to Apex, and the thing that I noticed the most different is console games, PC games have a long history of succeeding without product managers or without data insights. So there's an internal resistance to bringing those things in. In fact, in the early days of Apex, as we were talking about getting data engineers and data analysts, one of the senior designers was like, what would they even do all the time? Like, what could one possibly do? They won't have anything to do for an entire year. And we ended up having, at the time we launched, like 6 full-time analysts and product managers and all of that. But that was born out of making billion-dollar successful games without it. So there's a whole education process that needs to happen in PC and console. It is happening, but it's slow, it's taking time, and it's like kind of born out of results versus mobile was started more data first, so it's natural and just of course we need that. So a lot of education that is, in a good place now, but took a while to get there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any of the other you guys? Like I said, I know we have a super deep bench here. If not, David, I'm going to throw to you. So your PM team, we talked about this in prep, spans a lot of different disciplines. Like, how do you go about trying to hire the right kind of PMs to actually support Apex the way that it needs to be?
So I'm going to be coming at this primarily, I would say, from the AAA space, because all the games that I've worked on have generally been there. So Hearthstone, Call of Duty, Skylanders, Apex, all from the kind of same perspective that Lee was referring to. And by the way, Lee, the education is still going on. So just know in AAA it never stops, and it'll probably be going on forever. I don't think it'll ever end, because you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? So some people are stuck in their ways. But as far as hiring the right mix of PMs and the right skill set, I think it's less about hiring the right mix of PMs and making sure that you have, and this is controversial opinion, I think, for some folks, but I really think about building a team more on sound fundamentals. And so as long as you have a strong foundation as a PM, I think you can solve and do anything, right? And of course, with a lot of the AI stuff that Oren's talking about, it's really making the time to context and your ability to learn about your players, empathize with them more, learn about the problem space, like matchmaking. How many white papers has Call of Duty put out, right? That we can just read to get ramped up on that stuff. And so AI has just made that information gathering stage really fast. Long gone are the days of like 2 weeks of doing something, right? You can use deep research and get a ton of stuff and read it immediately and be super ramped up. So I think As long as you have a team that has, or PMs that have strong fundamentals, you can really shift them and move them around to wherever the business is needed at the time, right? For us, because we span a lot of different disciplines, sometimes we get resource taken away to do monetization stuff, right? But guess what? That's fine, because there's someone over there that's working on meta systems or core BR or something else. Really important, I think, as well, specific to the AAA space, is having people that have what's the right way to say this? I guess strong empathy. And when I say empathy, I mean with the designers, right? Like they don't respond well, like Lee was saying, to data. So you really have to be able to read the room, cut through, understand what they care about. And like, it sounds manipulative in a way, but think on your feet to kind of reposition what you're saying so that you can connect with that person and get things across the line. So empathy and a strong sense of communication and getting that done are really important. So to recap, empathy, strong communication, and sound fundamentals, I think, for PMs is what makes a strong team and gives you the ability to really flex around.
Thanks, David. JK, I kind of want to talk to you. We talked a little bit about in our prep, like the differences in team size and structure. Like, you know, I think we talked about larger teams or smaller teams. Can you kind of share with the audience like some of the thoughts around that and what might be some of the trade-offs there?
Okay, well, I've got a lot of thoughts about how teams, people, teams, and organizations will change. I think like, so there's a change I think that's coming with AI, which is, I think I have some controversial views and it's pretty long-winded, so I don't know if I want to dive deeply into that.
Go.
Okay. All right, so I am an AI maximalist. So I think one thing to think about is that I don't think that the current way that we think about product management is going to exist however much time from now. Maybe 12 months from now, maybe a couple of years from now, but I think it's going to change. And it'll change because when you think about what AI fundamentally is doing, is it's going to subsume a lot of work from different roles. And so just to kind of make this a little bit more practical, you know, I would talk to a PM at my company and that PM would be like, ha ha ha, look at the artists. All their work is going to get taken away by AI. And then, you know, I think Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, would post something and then they're like, haha, look at the engineers. All their work is going to be taken over by AI. And then I talk to the engineers and like, ha ha ha, guess what? All the product managers' work is going to be taken over by AI. And if you think about it, there are going to be a set of capabilities and tasks that are subsumed by AI, both on the low end and the high end, meaning like boring, repetitive work, obviously, will be taken over by AI. And there are going to be some types of tasks and work that are just too complex for human beings to figure out that are going to be taken over by AI. And so when you think about traditional roles, whether you're a product manager, or engineer, or artist, there's going to be a lot of tasks and capabilities that are taken over by AI. So what does that leave for humans? Well, if you go to the extreme in terms of AI and believe in superintelligence, and I absolutely hope we never get there, then in that world, you know, human beings just no longer have a need to exist, and superintelligence will do everything. But if we go to in that transition, and as AI gets better and better, what I think will actually happen is that roles will compress, teams will compress. And so what does that mean? That means that the work that a typical product manager will do, I think, is not going to make sense. And there's going to be something, a concept that I call organizational meta. Meaning, if you think about, like some people talk about AI in the context of like you have currently a fixed organizational structure that doesn't change. And at the other extreme end, you have a completely dynamic structure for a team and a company that completely changes. I don't believe in either view. I think that just like in League of Legends, when they changed the meta and champions' abilities, there's going to be limitations, capabilities, weights, meaning strengths and weaknesses, and various things that create an organizational meta. And so what I think is going to happen is that in this organizational meta for a specific kind of product, that what will happen is that there is going to be a maximally effective type of organization that makes the most sense. And so you may not have an engineer anymore or a product manager anymore. You might have a product engineer or a product marketer, or some of these roles are going to combine and there's going to be a new kind of organizational structure that is maximally effective. In these organizations that can't change because you're in a big company like, I don't want to name the companies. Some of these companies are still mad at me for things I've said in the past, but yeah, they're like still angry. It's like, dude, I said that 2 years ago. Anyway, but like, so if you're part of these large, big companies where you've got fixed roles and you're highly vertically oriented, you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. Your organization, I don't think is gonna be competitive in the future. So from the perspective of a product manager, I think that the product manager role, to some degree, is gonna, in some situations, completely not be necessary. Like especially if you do like web type of products and things like that. And also, but in gaming, maximally important. Because why? Because there needs to be somebody who orchestrates the organization. There needs to be somebody who looks at intelligence, and you talked about different kinds of returns. But there's also something that Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, calls a return to intelligence. And so when you think about this person who helps orchestrate the kind of organization that's necessary to be maximally competitive, and also is looking at where do we get the best returns to intelligence and applies that to different parts of the company, those are the kinds of organizations that are just gonna whoop ass on every other big organization that just fundamentally cannot change. I'll just stop there, sorry.
Goddamn, JK.
We got to get jamming to our next session. Thank you all so much. Tim, yes?
Can we just do like one takeaway from each person? Is that cool, man? Just because.
Of course.
Yeah, all right. So, yeah, well said, JK. Love it. The thing I just wanted to make sure we hit on was wealth of knowledge. What are you going to, based on what you said or whatever, what's like your one takeaway for all the people here to basically get ready for the change that's coming? We'll start on that end. David, you want to go this way?
I mean, just +1 to a lot of what JK said, honestly, like adapt or die, to be very, say it in a kind of an aggressive way, but this is, all the AI tools are the equivalent of Adobe Photoshop and everything, right? So find a way to use it. I think it's here to amplify, not replace.
Yeah, so I want to continue what you said. A lot of people ask me if AI is going to replace artist or PM or whatever role this person is asking for. And I think that as much as I research it more, I see that the only people that are going to be replaced are the people that will not adopt it. So PMs that adopt AI will replace PMs that will not adopt AI eventually. So that's it.
On the non-AI side, I think since this is a group of PMs, my recommendation is data and information is much easier to get now. So the problem is very obvious. What really matters is the so what. And so I encourage all designers to or all PMs to become more like designers and really start designing features and put on your design hat, which ultimately is a customer player focused hat. That makes you invaluable and hard to replace. So I push all PMs to do that. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, I would say like if the vision or the direction that I described is correct, then I don't think that this role of product manager as a standalone role makes sense. And I think what will happen is that it will be important to be what I'm calling a PM +1, meaning you understand the role, functions, skills of a product manager, but also have extreme depth in another area, whether it's engineering or marketing or some other area. I think those are the kinds of people that will be successful in this new world.
Well said. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, whoa. You skipped me.
What?
This is my karma. I did this to JK the other night.
Oh, go ahead. My bad.
LiveOps agents. That's it. Mic drop.
All right, we're back. I'm here with Tim Hong and Solomon Lichter. Thanks again to both of you for helping make this panel happen and for joining me here to unpack some of that discussion. So let's start with this. What was your biggest surprise from the panel or after the panel, just thinking back on some of the things that were discussed? anything you didn't expect that stood out, or anything you've been thinking about since that panel?
Oh, well, first off, JK, thanks for having us here. My gut reaction, like moment-to-moment reaction, was surprise was how well received it was. Right. I think that the reality is depending on the room you're in and the folks you're talking to, AI can be a blessing or a curse word. Right. But all in all, I think we're at a different point in the cycle where I think everybody realizes, okay, AI is not a magic bullet that will solve everything, but it does provide a ton of value. So how do I unlock that? So there's been a ton of great conversations around that. And the last thing I'll say is like, I think we're at a point too where we're seeing companies and studios and publishers move from idea to true POC to possible even things in production this year. Whereas last year, I don't think that was as much the case. So I think I was really surprised positively in how folks are thinking about this and the possibility of it.
Concur with everything that Tim said. I think there's just a huge hunger for more insights, both tactical, real world, and strategic, right? So I think a lot of people came to the event to learn that stuff. The AI panel was short and sweet. And so, we had, I'd say, a lot of people coming back to us and saying, like, hey, could we drill into this? Could we set up a call? Clients came to us that were inspired by the content of the panel. A couple big clients who, they're still in the conceptual phases of a lot of these things, but I think they realize that they're not going to get there on their own. And so there's this kind of like openness around collaboration. One particular client came to us and said, hey, we want to kind of build a council, right? And
Mhm.
you, as our LiveOps tooling provider, our analytics tooling provider, we want you to have a seat on that council. We're trying to build custom solutions of which you're going to be a part. And so we need to understand, like, how is AI going to help us basically orchestrate all of that? And so we've had a couple folks reach out to us there. That's exciting because it's enabling us to come to the table with not just our solutions, but with partners like AWS for games, who have a pretty burgeoning kind of AI practice. And
Mhm.
so I think we're all running at that opportunity right now because, like Tim said, there's no silver bullet. It's going to require, I'd say, significant, not just technical integration, but collaboration to build the right solutions for different studios.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, one of the things that stood out to me was just the level of uncertainty and bracing for change that I'm starting to see in a lot of leaders in the gaming industry today. Like, we talked about some macro trends, and we can discuss some of those things as well. But there's just been, since COVID and since like the overinvestment in gaming, and since we're going through a lot of different changes, and we talked about some of that during the panel in terms of the attention economy, in terms of AI. And so there just seems to be a lot of folks who are not quite sure what all of the changes that have been occurring environmentally mean for them. And how do you prepare for a world in which we've got so many things happening, and you've got the big sort of bigger macro trend that's kind of coming that we're also trying to brace for is this impact of AI. So I thought that was the most interesting part. And it seems like now more than ever is the time where, because there are a lot of different opinions and we've got so many changes, that having a good group of people to discuss some of these issues is valuable.
Hmm. Hmm.
And maybe we could speak to that, because during that discussion, we did speak to a number of macro trends: China's rise, attention fragmentation, AI, which was a big theme, also live ops resurgence. I know, Solomon, you had touched upon some issues around, kind of PC versus mobile and things of that nature. But since that panel, since GDC, what trends do you guys still think that maybe some product managers might be underestimating? Do you have any kind of follow-up thoughts based upon that conversation since GDC that you've thought about?
The whole idea that product management as a job is not going away. As a functional job, it's not going away. But I do believe, my hypothesis is that with the advent of knowledge being somewhat commoditized by AI, in the terms of like, hey, if you don't understand a term, you can query it, you can get context. As a PM, you're going to need to have something else to hang your hat on. And whether it's being design focused, analytics focused, right? Like,
there needs to be something that gets you a seat at the table and allows you to have the discussion around decision making, right? Because we're seeing like these large language models be able to answer basic queries and questions, and maybe even get more complex around, hey, what does segmentation look, what does good look like? But there's still going to be need for human inflow. And so the one thing I've seen on some forums and stuff is PMs are like boohooing AI, which I get. It won't take your job, even though it could pull together a PRD. But what is going to get you into the room to be able to speak to things and have opinions on things? I think that is where skilling up in a certain direction is going to be very necessary, right? Especially when you consider there's folks like myself. Yesterday I just turned 41, so I guess I'm old at this point, right? Where you have some
Happy
level of
birthday, Tim.
experience.
Your kid.
Thank you, folks. But I guess my whole point is you have a continuum of people here with varying levels of experience, and I think in a good way, AI does kind of level the playing field. So, what is your additive on top of that that allows you to say, "Hey, I'm right for your studio to help you make a better game"? So I
Yeah, I
think,
think.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Tim. I was about to say. I think you make a really strong point, and there have been a number of leaders in AI that have been talking about how AI will take over. Like there's Dario had mentioned half of white collar jobs in the next 5 years. There have been other folks who have also stated that even if AI doesn't progress anymore, like it just completely stops in terms of advancements, that a lot of white collar jobs will be given kind of the same time frame, should be taken away in the next 5 years. And so kind of like to your point, I agree with you, Tim, that the role of product management does remain, but it does, I think people should become a little bit more thoughtful about where does value flow, right? So because AI will be taking away certain kinds of work, and especially simple things, as you mentioned, and other kinds of work. But then if that happens, how do you maintain value as a product manager? And part of that is going to be thinking about what are the limitations of AI? Where are the hard parts? So that if you can do those hard parts, then that's where you'll continue to maintain value. I don't know if you agree with that, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, my quick follow-up funny thought to that is I immediately thought about a plumber. And literally, you pay the guy, a couple $100 to come fix something that maybe I could DIY. But the difference, to your point, is he could do it in 15 minutes. It'll take me 6 hours,
Yeah.
right? And that I think becomes the way to think about it, where you're right. Like, what can AI not do? And then what extra value do I bring? And I think for a lot of people, it'll be, hey, I ran X game. We tried this thing. Sure, we could run it through AI, but here's what happened. And so, if anything, uh, the function remains the same, which is to get experience that I guess AI can't replace. But at the same time, I really like what you said too about trying to be very thoughtful about it, right? I mean, that's something I think we're all trying to figure out. Like, what is the new space that we should occupy? Yeah.
Right. Solomon, your thoughts on macro?
Yeah, I think it's this kind of interesting mindset shift as folks begin to move from conceptual to actually beginning to build some prototypes and some proof of concepts, right? And I think that the conceptual shift seems to be thinking about leveraging AI less as a feature layer and more as like an orchestration layer. So what does that fundamentally what does that mean? I think building, instead of like relying on just like A/B testing and segmentation in the case of LiveOps, you're actually automating like one-to-one personalized messages at scale, offer pacing, personalized progression, one-to-one, right? That ultimately that's what you're going to have to do, and it's not going to just be our platform that enables you to do that. There's going to be other tools that build up this kind of orchestration layer. For example, we're talking to a client right now around using AI to basically tag content and manage content. Just that in and of itself, I think, is a big value add if someone could figure that out. And there's a bunch of like new school, as an example, digital asset management systems. These systems have been around for like 20 years, right? But in the context of like a game, using AI and like advanced ML and even like generative AI that's like learning from how the player behaves, this is a significant, I think, efficiency gain that folks could have. So it's like, how do you automate messaging at scale, offers at scale? How do you automate assets at scale? It's probably not going to be one platform that enables you to do it. We're going to knock out a big chunk of it. We're running it that quickly right now. Again, that's where other partners come in. That's where folks like AWS come in. And then how are you going to manage the compute of all that? That's going to
Right.
be expensive. That's where AWS comes in as well. So yeah, I think not thinking of it as like as a feature layer, but actually, the PM at the controls of a command center, orchestrating everything, I think is a fundamental shift that we're beginning to see. At least people begin to think about.
Right. And if I were to kind of interpret your comments, Solomon, and try to generalize and kind of simplify to some degree, it seems that there's kind of a few takeaways that I would interpret what you've said, which is like one, so there AI will have the ability of automating different kinds of work, but to your point, there are certain kinds of capabilities that will also be enabled by AI in terms of personalization, offers, messaging, CRM. And so one thing that PM should be thinking about is not only just kind of like how AI can automate specific kinds of works, but also thinking more offensively. So offensively and sort of defensively. Offensively meaning there's new capabilities, or there may have been some capabilities that are available to bigger teams, but because you've got AI, then all of a sudden a smaller team can start to compete against some of these bigger teams by thinking more offensively and thinking about the capabilities that you can bring to AI. And the other point you made around the orchestration, I do think, and we kind of touched upon that during the panel as well, but more and more having kind of like a broad-based view as well as like specific expertise. But the orchestration would require product managers to have a very broad understanding of all the different things that, whether it's AI or different kinds of tools and things, could do. And then the PM kind of being like the to the degree that creatives are tastemakers, a PM is kind of like a tastemaker for like the capabilities or tools or things that you can, from the world of capabilities, what are the specific things that we should be doing to optimize the game, given that there's so many different things that you could possibly do or get enabled because of AI. One question I wanted to ask you, Tim, is during that panel, you had mentioned the Gartner framework and specific types of return. And I think increasingly we're going to have to be thinking about return more thoughtfully. And one kind of concept or one KPI that as part of that Gartner framework is return on employee. And so I was wondering if you could kind of speak to how organizations or teams should be thinking about different kinds of return. And what are you seeing? How are some of the teams that you're working with thinking about these different kinds of return for their organization?
Yeah, great question. I want to give credit where credit's due. We had Mary Maseglio, one of the VPs over at Gartner, talk to us at AWS. There's a great podcast you could just Google that talks about. It's called the three AI business outcomes every leader must understand. And I'll quickly go over it. But the three areas are, to your point, return on employee, which is about helping your employees become more efficient. Return on investment, which is, hey, drive the bottom line or your actual KPIs, and return on future, which is, hey, create new capabilities and business models, right? And so the thought here is, to your point, let's rewind 6 months ago or even a year ago, and you say, hey, invest in AI. Well, people are like, okay, great. What does that mean? And I think now that we're in our current state, we can create these buckets because your CFO, your CTO, your CEO, everyone actually wants to say, great, we're going to spend X thousands or millions of dollars in this. What's actually going to happen? And so by creating these three buckets, you can kind of like extensively hedge your bets in a certain way. And so in terms of use cases, we could kind of tackle them one at a time. Return on employee, like helping employees become more efficient. Well, you really wouldn't measure that in like, ARPDAO changes to your players. What you might look at is, well, how fast are we able to execute on operational work? How much cost are we saving? And like what I got excited about JK and Solomon is there's some really, I'd say, cool, but maybe not very sexy projects. But as soon as we kind of talk about them, I think they'll make a ton of sense. Like one of them is, what if you were to leverage AI to create a knowledge base that captured every single initiative that your studio had tried on a game, right? Because what happens invariably is you hire a new person, they come in and say, oh, cool, why don't you do this new social feature? Well, if you created a knowledge base that was living and active, you can basically have that person or anybody query and say, why don't we try this kind of social feature? Is there any history around how well it didn't go? And that idea also can be applied for onboarding, right? If you're a new product person or engineer joining a job, there's probably some facets around company culture or how you do your deployments that is hard knowledge transfer. Or you have that one guy in the studio who knows everything, and therefore he has to stay there forever. Well, why not transfer that over? And I think that's where it gets really excited, where maybe these are not like the most player facing ones, but they're very impactful. I'll pause there for any thoughts or your responses on those.
Yeah, I think the other kind of maybe like downstream implication of thinking about return, and if we think about also what happens with AI is like, how do we even measure returns to some degree, especially in a world where if AI is taking on more and more work, and we're not clearly sure what the delineation is between an employee and AI, or maybe it doesn't even matter because you just want to measure the overall impact that that is kind of being brought into an organization, right? Like, or if you're working on a product, what is the overall delta, regardless of the human component versus the AI component? But also, in addition, if roles start to merge, right? Because a lot of the way that kind of productivity or returns to some degree are measured in a lot of organization today is through departments. But one of the things we talked about is, what if the product manager is doing stuff in product management, also doing maybe some stuff in marketing or engineering? How do we get like a holistic view on the return of that employee, for example, right? I think it just becomes more complicated. The world we live in is going to become a lot more complex, is kind of the way that I'm thinking about it.
We're going to be collaborating with computers, right? Like to this
Yeah.
point, it has been order taking, right? Hey, computer, do X, Y, Z. But I think we're entering a whole new world where it is about collaboration, and those lines get blurred for sure. And that's where, like I said, um, these projects, right? I'd say like are traditionally maybe they're more IT focused, HR focused. But if you think about it, like who wouldn't want a PM assistant who, whenever you bring on a new PM to a project, even if it's for like 6 months, hey, you're good to go. Here's the exact library of how we run our game. Here's why. You let them sit in front of the LLM, query it for an hour or two, and then ad hocly, right? I don't know about the rest of the PMs, but there's times when you're working flow, you have a question, you don't want to really bother anybody, so you just have to take a guess. Why do we have to do that anymore, right? So I think that's where it gets really exciting for that one bucket for sure. Yeah.
Hey, JK, real quick. Recently, I heard on one of your podcasts, I think you mentioned one of the new metrics, or most important metrics for all PMs, was something related to velocity. I forget the term you made.
Oh, product velocity.
Product velocity, right? So
Right.
I think ultimately that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That's what all of this is going to enable, and I fully agree with you. Right? That is going to be the most important metric, I think, for all PMs. And mobile PM specifically, LiveOps, focused PM specifically. It's all about velocity and how to leverage tools to increase velocity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Solomon, one of the other things from that panel discussion that you had talked about is the kind of culture clash between mobile and console. I think this space continues to emerge where we're seeing some cross-platform, some not, but certainly from a people perspective, we're seeing people start to more freely go between having worked on, HD games to mobile companies and vice versa. And do you have any updated thoughts in terms of mobile versus HD, as far as like whether it's organizationally or anything that you're seeing from a product perspective?
I think it's organizational. My thoughts on this haven't changed. I've gone deeper on it. I've had friends, recently who were kind of impacted by this and left organizations. These are expert mobile PMs, which I think the backdrop of all this, of course, is like the down market that mobile specifically has been in. and the glut of really smart mobile PMs that are on the market. These are a lot of friends of mine, clients of mine, right, and friends of mine. And I think a lot of them, immediately got snapped up by, AAA studios, AA studios, console studios, indie studios focused on Steam. But again, just like we spoke about, excuse me, at the panel, there's that cultural and organizational dichotomy between mobile PMs and like production focused organizations with producers, executive producers, thinking about things more from the perspective of like art than science. And then I think that there's the inability, obviously, to act on data quickly and make things happen that, these mobile PMs ultimately you don't have the patience for. And so you end up in a situation where I think these console folks, they want access to that talent because they know that's where everything is headed, and they want to get into more of an agile, velocity driven, release model, right, for their games. But organizationally, they're not set up to do that, and culturally, they're not set up to do that, and politically, they're not set up to do that. And so we're going to continue, I think, to see some shakeout from that, and then ultimately, there's going to be some winners that emerge, and the winners are going to figure out how to tune their organizations to better capitalize on these people's strengths, right? And I got some,
Yeah.
I have some people that some organizations that I'm looking at specifically. I think Riot, I think has been doing some cool things based on folks I've talked with. They're still working on Valorant Mobile, of course, but I think the console side of the house has adopted some of those mobile PM principles. And this is, again, I'm not inside of the organization. This is based on conversations I've had with numerous people in the product world over there. But the folks who adapt to this quicker and make these changes faster are going to win, and the folks who don't are going to continue to struggle and probably miss out on talent. I think it's a retention issue fundamentally.
Yeah, kind of like to the point that you're making, even if we were to step back and just generalize, like there has been this culture clash and kind of these issues between mobile development philosophy versus HD kind of ways of doing things as well. But even more broadly, even before AI, we've seen a lot of changes happen from a macro perspective, as we had talked about, which we're going to have to adapt to as an industry. The games industry has to adapt to all these different changes that we were already seeing from a live ops, rise of China, all the other stuff that we talked about. And then when you layer on top all these things, all these changes and things that's coming from AI, like to the point that you're making, more broadly, we're going to see a whole new set of winners and losers. And so this is kind of like a warning to the industry that if you do dig in and just try to be so narrowly focused and just be stuck to, well, this is how we did it before. Well, I think one of the things that we're saying, one of the key themes from this panel is change is not only here, but even more change is coming. And really, it's kind of like the way that I generalize some of your comments now, Solomon, is basically adapt or die, that these things are coming. A lot of them are already here. And if we continue to see some of the resistance and kind of the issues that we've seen, even just between mobile versus HD, but even more broadly with all the stuff happening, it's going to be a very crucial time for really people to be a little bit more adaptable and flexible.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we're seeing the challenges just incorporating, mobile kind of tech-driven, product management methodologies, right? We kind of mentioned that on the panel. It comes from technology products, right? It comes from the lineage is Zynga, the lineage is Facebook, very different from the traditional kind of HD AAA world, and that cultural shift and incorporating all these really who I think are really talented folks. I'm obviously super biased. We do a lot of mobile stuff, have a lot of mobile clients. But if that's been a challenge, just organizationally, right, for the industry to kind of capitalize on this glut of talent, what does that mean when the release cycles compress even more and velocity becomes something that like everyone needs to have? So,
Yeah.
like you kind of extrapolate that and you can see it's, if you're having trouble figuring out how to work in these kind of best in practice live services, live ops methodologies and teams, it's going to be even harder, I think, for a lot of these orgs to adapt to the new reality that human intervention, if you forget, different cultures or like different type ways of doing things, human intervention is going to continue to be kind of mitigated. And so
Right.
you could see how folks are going to struggle with that.
Okay. And one of the key themes during that panel, obviously, and we've already touched upon this a bunch, is AI. And actually, I think both of you in particular would be really great to answer this question, just because both of you have a lot of gaming customers and clients. You're talking to a lot of different people doing things in the industry today. So based upon what you're seeing and kind of like the high level broad view that you have from your clients, customers, and partners, do you guys have any specific examples of how some of those folks are using AI in a more meaningful way? Now, obviously, there's some things that a lot of people are doing, which is like using ChatGPT for research or writing, and it's super useful there, obviously. But I'm wondering if you guys are seeing anything interesting that some of your clients or partners are also doing.
The answer is absolutely yes. The caveat, though, I would say, and the hesitancy that I think is healthy from PMs is back to the whole point about it not being a magic bullet or not leading with, oh, how do we AI this thing or how do we AI-ify it up or whatever. Um, Instead, what I think we're seeing, and a lot of folks who've been in the industry for a long time is like, look, AI and ML and some idea of bots have been around for forever. Um, but in terms of like specific examples, right? Like we're seeing things like QA testing starting to get even moved to this next level of not just automation, but contextual automation or ideation on great. We ran X smoke tests for this kind of device. How do we scale that up further, right? Once again, thinking about how are we actually getting to market faster. Another big one that I think we should talk about is just the whole idea of agentic AI, right? And the way to think about it very simply is like it's kind of like how you figure out to play a video game, right? Like this is the analogy I think about, right? Like you start with like your basic controls, you play through a level, and you experiment, and then you just kind of figure out how to play. Like I think about like Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat. Like whenever anybody starts playing for the first hour, nobody knows what the heck they're doing, right? But the whole idea with agentic is, hey, you let this person keep playing the game. After a while, they're going to get better at it, and that's the whole idea around what agentic is versus regular AI. And so the reason I mention that is because currently, as someone who worked on a bunch of games before, like in some ways, I was the bottleneck of execution for LiveOps because it was up to my interpretation, my execution of the tools to be able to actually do a bunch of stuff. And so what we're seeing, JK, is folks saying, okay, cool. What is this agents thing? How do we break it down? And the answer really is you're going to start seeing functional agents appear within the workflow. So you won't have like the one agent who runs your entire live ops, but you might have a segmenting agent whose only job is to look at how to segment players. And here's one I got really excited about was like, look, as a former game PM that ran free-to-play games, your non-spenders are a segment that's pretty easy to kind of like say, well, I don't have all the time in the world to figure out how to convert them to be payers, and the demands on me are to try to figure out how to drive revenue or drive engagement. Well, what if you made an agent whose pure job it was to observe the health of non-spenders, not to try to convert them to spend, but to figure out, hey, are we engaging our player base in the most positive, healthy way? Like to me, I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, so there's tons of agent examples. We're seeing people, like I said, actually figure out how to bring those to POC. And the underlying part is if your data strategy is not solid, it's really hard to like create a training model on that. So the specific example here is people want to do agents and they're realizing, well, we got to get our data house in order to do that. And so I think it's a very exciting time to kind of consider the possibilities there.
Yeah, and agents in particular, this is where a couple of the things that we've discussed before come into play. One is like when you're thinking about returns and where you could potentially deploy various kinds of agents, you really have to think about what you want these agents to do, right? And so to the point that Solomon, you mentioned about orchestration, you're gonna like the part of the role of the PM is gonna be, okay, I have the power of agents at my disposal. Where am I going to deploy them, and how do I measure whether it's a good use of these agents or not? And then finally, in a world of agents, I think more like vendors are going to have to think about how do you have services that are agent enabled. And what I mean by this, and I can give you a very specific example, but there are a number of vendors, like web shops right now is a big thing. As far as I know, there's only a single vendor, I'll have to confirm this, that where you can drive your web shop through API, and that's Stash, as far as I know. So like if you have these services that depend on human beings like a PM or product manager going into a UI and manually configuring things, I mean, sure, maybe agents later will be able to figure that out and do that, but the more that you make it programmable by having services not be through requiring manual intervention, but being more API enabled and making these things more agent friendly, those are the services I think that are going to win in this new world of agentic.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Tim. The point I like to make is, I've been in the game tech space for going on 6 years. I've been in the marketing automation space for like 16 years. And we in the marketing automation space, and that's broadly, right, across multiple industries. And we in the marketing automation space, we see the agentic thing as like an existential shift, opportunity, threat, however you want to look at it, right? Once agents are fully up and running, automation is going to be completely eaten by agents. And that's just like broadly speaking in MarTech, in marketing automation in general. And then you think about like LiveOps and all the use cases around LiveOps, right? Whether it's like actively managing the economy in real time based on the available amount of currency and the players in the pool and the players that are spending versus the non-spenders. That's a huge opportunity because I think we've all seen, I've seen it with my clients, one human error gets made and you could break your economy and it costs you $100,000 or whatever it is. And like people get fired over stuff like that, right? So this is a huge opportunity, right? Huge opportunity around tuning offer, which then ties back into the economy. Again, it becomes one true one-to-one personalization. We're not quite there yet, and it's going to take a whole hell of a lot of compute to get there, which is, why I know we're leaning in so hard with AWS for games as it relates to kind of delivering this, but other use cases too. I mean, speaking to some of the practical things that I'm beginning to see clients do, I mentioned that using AI to dynamically tag content and assets in games. That's a very manual process typically, right? And so that's a huge efficiency driver. And if you think about what like CleverTap does, as an example, this is the analogy I like to give. Our whole thing is we're trying to eliminate, or not eliminate, or remediate developer intervention with a lot of these more complex LiveOps events and offers. That's our whole thing, right? We're trying to make product leaders, product teams, LiveOps managers, non-technical business users more efficient. We're trying to kind of democratize that execution. So, your core dev team could focus on more mission critical systems and features and roadmap. Now with this new paradigm shift, we're talking about remediation of human intervention or at least remediation of excessive manual intervention. That's a huge opportunity. But to your point, as these things proliferate, the PM's role or the LiveOps manager's role is going to change, and you're going to have to figure out how to orchestrate all these different tools doing all these different things. So yeah, we're super excited about all this stuff. We have our clients driving a lot of innovation there. We got amazing partners like AWS for Games that are building really strong practices around this. And again, the clients that I think are thinking about it in the right way are like, hey, how do we put together like a committee, to build the best possible solutions, given our unique use cases in our games.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add one more point here, which is like, I know we talked about return on employee. I think agentic very well lives in the possible return on investment bucket, right? Because Solomon, I totally agree, right? As of right now, it feels like every 2 weeks, someone significant in the space is releasing something new, and you're like, oh, I got to try that, I got to try this. But I think like my unsolicited thought to PMs out there is like, look, how do you want to use this to drive real business value to your org? That is how you win and get investment. And I do think it is going to be a piecemeal approach only because of the velocity of change we're seeing. What we may recommend today may not be as impactful in 12 months. And that's great. That's actually good. But I think when you think about agents by domain and by function, like that's where I think it gets exciting, right? Because we're talking about moving away from rule-based systems, which are brittle and kind of like can change, right? Like, how do you know if like your first-time user spend should be $10 right now? Maybe in 12 months it should be 7 or 8, or like that's where I think it gets really exciting. And that's where I would say, when you think about trying to drive bottom line values, that's where I think agents, you can kind of start justifying cost if you can, expand the bottom line. So yeah.
Well, I thought we could wrap with just maybe from your perspective and given all that you're seeing, one last piece of advice to product managers who, given our current environment with all the changes happening with the coming of AI, how should they think about staying relevant and valuable over the next 2 to 3 years, which should be one of the most kind of dynamic and changing times in our lifetime, maybe even in human history, depending on what happens with AI. So anyway, one final piece of advice.
I am kind of thinking about how the barrier to entry to try out a lot of things is actually extremely low in kind of like I'm thinking about my span of life here, right? Like you have um, different cloud providers like ourselves and others where you could pay as you go. You want to mess around with something like image recognition or sound recognition, go do it. You want to try a different LLM, go. They're going to only charge you for a month or maybe it's free. Like, I think this is akin to what you're saying, JK, of like, hey, we've all been riding on horses and now the car comes along. Like, we can't be afraid of the car, Like,
Yeah.
go take a ride, go take a spin, and then go mess it up. Like go figure out what didn't work and keep moving. Because I think, like I said, this isn't like, hey, something's new, give me $10,000 to try it. It's no like, hey, something's new, spend $20 in 2 hours and see what happens. So I'd say get dirty, be curious, and I don't know what will happen, but good things will happen. And I think that's my one piece of advice.
Yeah, I'd echo all of Tim's comments. Kind of on the same token, I think that a lot of folks I know in the space, particularly the PMs who work in more AI friendly environments, or even like AI native game companies, or trying to build AI native game companies. I feel like there's a culture just in startups in general and tech in general of stealth, right? People ultimately don't like to talk about this stuff, and they're trying to maintain first mover advantage, or whatever it is, or competitive separation. Listen, I don't think that's like, there's nothing, you can't hide the innovation at this point. Like, you could go to a language model and figure out half of this stuff. It's all about execution. Of course, people are going to have cool ideas, but I think that's the wrong approach to take. And so my guidance to any PMs, whether you're mobile, console, whether you work at a AI native studio, or just a very AI enabled studio or publisher, build in public, right? Share your experiments, your failures, your thinking. Do that out loud. I think the future probably belongs to PMs who learn out loud, because ultimately it's no one person is going to figure it out. It's going to be a collective thing, and the whole space is going to innovate as a result of it. So that would be my guidance, because I think the more open different PMs can be with each other, the more they're going to collaborate, even across competitive IP and titles, right? Because ultimately, everyone's going to have access to these tools. The whole industry is going to evolve and I think improve as a result of it. And so, better to be collaborative and open than try to maintain stealth for first mover advantage.
Yeah. And I would say my advice to any product managers out there is that I truly believe, and have for a while, that the impact of AI will be the biggest, not only in our lifetime, but possibly all of human history. And so like now is not the time to relax. If some of these AI guys are right, this may be the last opportunity to work hard. Like maybe AI just takes over and does everything. So my advice to a lot of the folks out there is like, you have to learn as much as possible, right? Push now, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Your job may be at risk. There will likely be sort of power law distribution in terms of value and wealth. And so if you're a little bit ahead of the curve, if you are just a little bit better than someone else, that could mean a 10x, 100x, 1000x difference. So now is not the time to relax, would be my advice for folks out there. But with that, thank you guys so much. Thanks, Tim and Solomon. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this, please feel free to like and subscribe. We've got more deep dives coming in terms of product management, as well as AI and game development and what makes great games. Thank you for staying tuned, and we will catch you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, JK.
Thanks, JK.